Hello folks, this is part 2 of my roundup of everything that we learned from the midnight reveal at Gamescon. It is worth saying before I dive in that Blizzard themselves have released some conflicting information at times in the last week. This video does have all of the most recent updates, but it does include a few corrections from my previous video which I will highlight as I go. The addition of a new specialization for Demon Hunters had already been teased, along with the addition of Void Elves as a racial option. This new specialization is called Devourer and will be a mid-range to melee specialization which will utilise Demon Hunters' traditional mobility with Void-themed attacks. Associate Game Director Paul Kubert in his reveal did acknowledge that this does create a bit of a faction imbalance for Demon Hunters with 2 Alliance but only 1 Horde racial option. And while he did not provide any concrete details, he did tease that there are potentially more class and race and maybe even specialization options in the pipeline which we could see later on in Midnight. More broadly, all classes are getting an extra 10 talent points, which will be spread between the class, hero and specialization talent trees. The class tree is getting 3 points to go into existing nodes. The hero tree is getting a 4th column with 3 new talents, and the spec tree is getting a brand new apex node. This will be a 4-point node with 2 major capstone talents and 2 lesser ones. This new node will not be compulsory. You will instead be able to spend the points in the rest of your spec tree if you prefer, but Paul did say that the team's aim was to make these Apex talents exciting enough that they would be very widely used. Moving on to look at open world systems, and I have already covered the new prey system a little in my last video. This, according to Paul, is intended to be an extra option for solo and open world players. The initial indications which I did cover in my part 1 was that this would be a cosmetic system with no player power, but it turns out that that wasn't correct, as this will be awarding gear and even contribute to the Great Vault with the hardest difficulty offering hero tier gear. You will start out on the prey system by picking up a contract from Astalor in Silvermoon's Murder Row. This is an already existing area in Silvermoon that Blood Elves will be very familiar with, and it turns out this is being described as being part of the neutral Alliance Horde hub for Midnight. Instead of a traditional World of Warcraft quest mechanic where you go out and kill 5 boars and then take them back to the quest giver to hand in, you will instead have to try and track your prey down. And while you do that, your prey will also be tracking you, which potentially means that the final boss of the prey could end up turning up and attacking you while you're off doing other stuff. This isn't the only new piece of content that open world players will be getting though, as we're also going to be seeing the continuation of those open world events which we've become very familiar with in Dragonflight and The War Within. And the new events are going to be themed according to the various new zones. Silvermoon will have the Silvermoon Court, where we will have to balance our reputation with 4 military groups. This was described as being similar to an Alder versus Scryer system, which could be very interesting, as I think that this would be the first time that we have experienced that particular mechanic since Burning Crusade. Sylvanas will see us harvesting materials for the Lore of Abundance. Described as a fast-paced collection mechanic with a profession theme, this will see us explore caves against the clock. And despite being the Sylvanas themed, these caves will be located in all of the new zones. Legends of the Harrenir will ask us to explore magical paintings to embark on bite-sized lore journeys, which we can do at our own pace, be it fast or slow. And in Voidstorm, we will help the Void Elves in the Stamarian Assault, which very much sounds like another swing at Awakening the Machine, albeit one that will be group-based. The biggest changes to the open world though are going to be to levelling. I have already covered in part 1 the team's plans to revamp Exile's Reach, Dragonflight and even The War Within for new players as characters. And this, it appears, is another area where the early details we received were incorrect, as the new Exile's Reach experience, instead of involving Thrall and Jaina, will instead be themed around Dragonflight and will include Rathian, Khadgar and Alexstrasza. and we will see them preparing to embark on their return to the Dragon Isles, which I think is kind of interesting as it has the potential to fill a little bit of a lore gap for us and answer the question of why and how the dragons did find their way back to the Dragon Isles. And then it will be on to Dragonflight, where, as well as the original 4 zones, the leveling up campaign is now also going to include the max level campaigns through the Zaralek Caverns and Emerald Dream, even including via story mode the raids, with Razageth getting a brand new story mode. This will get players to level 70, where they will then head into the War Within, which is also getting the same treatment, with Undermine and Koreshi's campaigns being integrated into the leveling experience, which we're also being promised it will be significantly sped up. That latter change for the War Within's level up campaign is actually going to be launching in patch 11.2.7 and will be available to existing characters as well, should you want to try it out. For returning players, as well as the promised brand new experience in the Arathi Highlands, which will include Jaina and Thrall, along with the new lore working feature, these players are also going to be getting a bit of a free cleanup of their quest logs and gear resets to help smooth the re-entry into the game. This sounds like a fairly flexible experience, with pointers to pick up other quests and trying to avoid all of the usual distractions that do serve to make it difficult for long-term returning players to get their bearing. One thing that is interesting about this experience is that it has been described as a drop-in and drop-out system, which means that those players will have other options. And it is also going to include skywriding tutorials and even an interrupt tutorial. Now, just before I move on from the open world, one thing that has been causing a bit of discussion in the community in the last couple of days was the status of Silvermoon as the expansion hub. This was initially described by design director Maria Hamilton as remaining predominantly Horde only, with only a small part of it being open to both factions, with the rest being kill on site. This did elicit some very mixed reactions from the community, but in an interview with Taliesin and Evitel, Maria revealed that her quest team had asked her to issue a bit of a clarification, which is that in fact Silvermoon is going to be about 1/3 Horde only, with the rest 2/3 of it being open to both factions. For me personally, it simply made no sense that the heroes of the Alliance, who were also confirmed as being part of the armies that flood through the Sunwell portal to Silvermoon's aid, would be treated as an enemy. And I do think that having a much more expansive space available as a hub, while keeping at least some part of it as a more exclusive Blood Elf capital, probably does strike a much better balance. And yes, you did hear that correctly. That army that we see in the Midnight reveal isn't just some generic army of the light, as in the Midnight introduction, we players will be the ones who are called by the light to come to Silvermoon's aid in its darkest hour since Arthas's attack in Warcraft 3. Talking about interesting snippets from Maria. And in an interview, something else that emerged was a question about what major lore characters beyond the Blood Elves we might end up seeing in Midnight. Something that led to a very major tease that we will see Sylvanas at some point. Maria wasn't giving anything else away there, so it does remain to see how that will play out. This would be a very odd way to tease a major story moment. So I personally suspect that when we do see Sylvanas, it will be in a minor, possibly even fleeting role. Perhaps the new Windrunner Spire dungeon. So if you are a Sylvanas fan, I'd strongly advise managing your expectations very carefully to avoid disappointment. Another thing that had already been covered was the new 40 vs 40 battleground Slayer's Rise. But Ian did have a bit of a surprise for us, as this is not only going to be an instance battleground, there is also going to be an open world version, which means that this particular battleground is going to be joining a very exclusive club, which currently includes Wintergrasp, Tolbarad and Ashran. PvP often feels very neglected, and even more so when it comes to world PvP. So while it does remain to be seen how this will pan out in practice for the more modern era, it is very good to see. Interestingly, this does have one major change from those previous versions, and that is that it is also going to have some regular world quests for people who enter with war mode off, which essentially means that this zone is also going to have a PvE option. Now, one of the big issues with World of Warcraft's PvP is that it can be very intimidating to get into. High-level PvP requires very deep knowledge of every class in the game, how they work and how to counter all of their abilities. And with the old hands at PvP being incredibly knowledgeable, it's not only intimidating to get into, but it can also be a pretty miserable experience, as newbies often don't last long against the pros. To address this, the team is introducing brand new training grounds. This is essentially an extension to Comp Stomp, the brawl that allows us to take on computer-controlled enemies. This new version will add Battle for Gneis and Silver Shard Mine as options and will always be available. Now, it's fair to say that the current Comp Stomp doesn't really teach you anything about PvP, as the enemies are, well, not exactly challenging. But Ian did describe the new opponents in this new system as being quite a bit smarter than the bots we have seen so far. Now, the current Comp Stomp is pretty popular, but I think that is mainly due to people farming Maps of Honor. I know that that's what I use it for, and I do wonder how this will fill that gap for that particular audience, or if perhaps Comp Stomp will be retained in the Brawl lineup as well. Now, over the last couple of months, we have seen the World of Warcraft team make their first early swings at replacing some of the more popular combat add-ons, such as the Cooldown Manager, which is getting an update in 11.2.5, and the One Button Assistant. First of all, the much needed nameplate revamp is coming in midnight. The good news is that the preview we were shown does include quite a bit of customization. It is for sure not as supercharged as Plater, nor was it ever going to be, with the World of Warcraft dev team, for example, suggesting that they plan to eventually block the ability to color code enemies in nameplates. But despite that, it will still offer quite a few power user features, including cast bars being more prominent for more dangerous enemy spells, highlighted interrupts, and the option to show enemy and friendly debuffs, and most importantly for me as a tank, options to track threat on nameplates. By far the biggest improvement though was to the readability of the nameplates, with the new options looking a lot better than the current default nameplate. But if you do like that old school appearance, that is going to remain as a customization option if ignorance is bliss for you. Another major improvement is the promised arrival of damage meters. There wasn't a lot of information here about customizability, but in one developer interview we were promised that there is also going to be a healing meter option as well. And the screenshot of the damage meters will look very familiar to Details users. The Blizzard version will be controlled from the game servers, meaning that it will have access to much more accurate damage numbers, especially in scenarios where we split the raid into groups, where Details often loses track of other players due to distance. And the third and final update was to another promised feature, the boss timeline, which is intended to eventually replace the likes of DBM and Bigwigs. Now, there was some conflicting information at the event if this is going to be part of the midnight launch, but in the systems panel it was described as being a midnight feature, so I do suspect that it will be there right from the start. Albeit I also suspect that this particular feature is one that will get some additional development and expansion as the expansion progresses. Now, when talking about user interface improvements, Ian also did reiterate that this is a very long and ongoing process, and that there will be many more user interface improvements to come later in the expansion. I, for one, am certainly hoping that at some point our group frames will get updated, because after these new additions, those group frames are certainly the biggest outstanding issue that the default user interface still has. Now, of course, the big question that I think many people will have in mind is, what does all of this mean for add-ons? Realistically, Gamescom was not a forum to introduce any plans for add-on restrictions. And as far as I know, none of the interviewers gave any answers about this. So I suspect that we will still have to wait for the alpha and beta process to kick off before we get any insights about how this is going to affect add-ons at the launch of Midnight. My own personal opinion is that Blizzard should focus on launching and refining these features to make them attractive enough for players to start switching over organically before they lapse into using compulsion. When we add in, they also promise changes to fight design, which are intended to reduce the need for add-ons at all. And there is, I think, a golden opportunity for the developers to see how players change their own behaviour when it comes to add-ons. And finally, from the systems panel, we got our first visual glimpses of the new Transmog system, which will allow us to transmog onto slots instead of gear items, reducing but not completely eliminating those transmog costs. The most interesting part of the new system is the situational outfit slots, which will allow players to change their outfits based on context. This included a screenshot of the potential options, which included location, movement, specs, equipment sets, racial forms, and even professions. The racial forms option is something that I think will be very popular for players of Worgen and Evoker, who often struggle to get transmog sets that look consistently good on their characters. One thing though that was disappointingly missing for me was a combat option. I've always fancied the idea that my character could have a visible helmet in combat, but not otherwise. So this one is a bit of a shame, and I do hope it is something that the developers can add in the future. Now, one very significant detail that came out in interviews but was very strangely not mentioned in any of the reveals or panels was confirmation that there is going to be a stat squish for Midnight, with damage numbers dropping down from the thousands to perhaps just hundreds. I'm personally not a massive fan of stat squishes. They feel weird and they always end up breaking some content. But in a numbers goes up game like World of Warcraft, they are still inevitable. But I do wonder, with the Last Titan likely taking us to level 100, if we might end up seeing another full level squish then, as it does feel very unlikely to me that the developers would want to let the game go up to level 120 ever again. Now, one perhaps surprise omission from the reveal in the panels was the relative lack of mention of housing, even though Blizzard did have a very substantial hands-on demo at the event. And this was something that Ian did acknowledge in one of the panels, explaining that that was because we have had so many details announced already, which is probably fair. He did though wrap up the systems panel by formally announcing that the housing early access will indeed be launching in patch 11.2.7. Now, the one big question in all of this is, of course, when are we going to see Midnight release? Older hands will no doubt not be surprised to hear that Blizzard was not sharing any specific dates at these events, beyond confirming that Midnight would be arriving in the first half of 2026. This matched up with the fine print on Battle.net for the Midnight pre-orders, which promises that it will be going live sometime before June the 30th. However, that particular day, if it was missed, would trigger refunds. And that means it is generally a date that is heavily padded by Blizzard, so it's likely to be launching at least 2 to 3 months before that date arrives. Now, in one of the interviews, Cyber did ask about the potential for a Season 4 for The War Within, and that was very firmly ruled out by Ian, which means that Season 3 is, as I think many of us expected, the final season of The War Within. In the past, the final seasons of an expansion have often been built out to last longer than usual, for example by having more bosses in the raid or systems like corruption to keep us busy. But when I look at Season 3, it really doesn't seem to be built to last any longer than any of the other War Within seasons. And if anything, the current Mythic Plus season, where folks are already 1 to 2 key levels beyond where they'd normally be in week 2, It feels like it may even be intended to be a bit shorter. Add in the announcement from Ian that the Midnight Alpha will be starting in just a few weeks, and it does seem to me like all of the data points are pointing towards a Q1 release for the Midnight expansion. Taking the now standard 8-week patch cycle and assuming a 4 to 5 week pre-patch, and I have arrived at this set of estimated dates, which basically has Midnight Early Access on the 19th of February, with delayed access starting on the 23rd. Now, as an already very engaged World of Warcraft player who, despite a fair few bumps in the road, has overall enjoyed much of the War Within, I'm pretty excited about what was announced. Overall, there was a heavy focus on continuing with what the dev team clearly see as a winning formula, but at the same time they are looking to innovate a little with the raiding scene, which I do think does need a little freshen up. The biggest feature of all, player housing, is something that I have wanted in World of Warcraft for a long time now, and while the very long series of announcements has in some ways made me feel a bit less hyped for it, I do know that I will soon get over that when I get my main character set up in a shiny new home, and this alone would be enough to seal the deal for me with the Midnight expansion. That said, I don't think it will be for everyone, and I am a little surprised that Blizzard didn't have anything else major up their sleeve to announce. While I'm generally positive about the open world content announcements we did get, I would personally like to have seen the team announce a much bigger swing at the open world, which currently, in my view, is overly reliant on overarching weekly events and meta quests, along with an increasingly stale feeling rares and treasures formula. The last really big swing was in Legion with the world quest and emissary system, which will be just shy of 10 years old by the time Midnight comes out. Yes, we really are getting that old, and which in my view has been very severely watered down ever since its release. Delves do help to fill part of that gap, but that is instance content, and when I look at how empty the Koresh map is midweek, I really do feel a lack of reasons to visit the open world creeping in, and that is a bit of a shame. Despite that though, I am still very excited about all of the announcements, and I am looking forward to Midnight. If you're someone who is wondering if you should pre-order Midnight, then if you have been enjoying Dragonflight and the War Within, I say it would be worth it, albeit I would advocate waiting until closer to the housing preview release to see what additional in-depth information does emerge from the alpha and beta. As a general rule, the more information you have when making a purchase decision, the better. And if you're someone who's thinking about returning to World of Warcraft, especially if you bounced off BFA or Shadowland, World of Warcraft has changed enormously since those days, and it is for sure worth giving it another go. The Midnight pre-order does include the War Within expansion as well, meaning that you won't have to pay for both expansions, and jumping in early would allow you a good swing at getting caught up. One of the biggest changes to World of Warcraft over the years has been the introduction of a myriad of catch-up systems, which offer much faster leveling, and it's never been easier to bridge the gap between leveling gear and what you do need to start engaging with the max level content. Anyways, that's all I have to share for now. I'll be back to my regular news roundups this coming weekend, where I'll be chatting about everything that's been happening in the current game, along with rounding up any late breaking snippets of information for Midnight. If you've any questions about what has been announced or just want to share your thoughts, then do sound off in the comments below. If you found this update helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos along with my other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. If you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me on social media for notifications. My link's in the description below as well. And finally, if you missed it, part 1 of my Gamescon recap should be on screen now with a ton of other details. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.